Hey, everybody, Simon Dixon here, and I'm going live with another emergency broadcast. I try not to do these too frequently, but the US executive order is probably more important than most people think. So we're going to go beyond the fluff and talk about how it fits in with geopolitics, because there's no coincidence that this is being released right now. So the headline is that Joe Biden on yesterday signs a US executive order in order to get all of the different government agencies to collaborate on their policy on cryptocurrency at a time when there's lots of very important things going on in geopolitics. No coincidence. Let's dig right in today, and in this emergency broadcast, we're going to go beyond the fluff, as it said. I'll tell you what the U.S. executive order actually means, and then we'll go beyond into the geopolitical environment today. For those of you that haven't seen my live broadcast and my emergency broadcast, you can get them all together at retirementplanb.com/book. First one was about the IMF's and special announcement on Bretton Woods 2. The second one was on El Salvador and the Bitcoin volcano bond. The third one was on the invasion in Ukraine and Russia. And this one is about the US executive order, and it all falls forward into a narrative around that I forecasted over a decade ago in Bank to the Future, Protect Your Future Before Governments Go Bust. You can get a free copy of that as well. And the 4-part video series that I released 2 years ago, getting everyone ready for what comes next and what comes ahead. So let's jump straight in. And one more final thing. I don't want to be insensitive to those that are currently having weapons of mass destruction dropped on their country and your freedoms are being taken away. My thoughts are with everybody that is experiencing that right now. The second thing is that anybody that is a victim of the financial weapons of mass destruction that are being thrown away and thrown at you right now, that is destroying your wealth and destroying everything you built for, it is equally as frightening and traumatic for people, and I don't want to be insensitive to that. And the third thing is, let's remember as well that there are plenty of wars that are happening right now and have not got all the media attention that this one has, because they don't have oil involved, and it may not be two countries that have white skin involved as well. So let's always be sensitive that there are a lot worse things as well happening, but I don't want that to desensitize away from the trauma of having weapons of mass destruction, financial weapons of mass destruction, and the impact that that's going to have on the people that are victims of the leaders that are currently putting you in the middle of those situations. So let's go into the US, the US executive order as well. So as I said, it's basically a whole of government US emergency thoughts on how to put together. They're writing a paper is the end result on the future of money, and it's banging all these different 3-letter and 4-letter acronym government departments' heads together and saying this is becoming more important and we need to make sure that we get on the right side of financial future. A shame he didn't read the book that I wrote on this over a decade ago, and Biden is welcome for that. And I'm also going to be writing a new one as well, and be making sure that all the proceeds from that book goes to something that supports more people building and protecting their wealth in these times of financial weapons and mass destruction destroying people's wealth. So that's the executive order. Right. Now, there's going to be months and months of debate, and everyone's going to talk about their vested interest, and the IRS is going to say this, and the SEC's going to say this, and the CFTC is going to say this, and the FDIC is going to say this, and all these different acronyms. But let me just save you the boring part of reading the paper and all the months of debate that are going to follow. What is going to be the end result of this? Well, the end result is that the US is going to decide the classification of various crypto assets, and it is going to impact how other countries follow and the reaction of other countries. They will either copy like sheep, or they will decide that we're going to have a better policy and take advantage of all the jobs, opportunities, and everything that comes from it. But I can tell you right now, to save you all the bother, what the end result of this is going to be. The first thing is it's going to be turning stable coins into central bank digital currencies and defining their policy on what they're going to do with private companies like Facebook or Tether, and how they're going to react to private companies creating their own stable coins in an environment competing with Fedcoin. The idea behind this is to treat it in the end as a currency, so that a central bank digital currency is not treated as security and all the legal implications of that. And why do that? So that you can have anti-money laundering policies, sanctions, and ultimately the thing that's more important to them, tax collection, so that they can pay all the interest on the US dollar debt-based Ponzi scheme as they hyperinflate the value of the US dollar into the position that it is today. So that's going to be the first thing, stable coins. The second one is going to be turning DeFi products and alternative cryptocurrencies into securities, so that they can implement what they call the SEC, taking jurisdiction over it, the Securities and Exchange Commission, so that they can implement investor protections. And those investor protections will lead to anti-money laundering and tax collection as a result of defining those as securities, so that they don't compete with traditional financial markets. Remember, when I started talking about this way back in 2016, if they allowed initial coin offerings to continue as they were, then companies would have been delisting off stock exchanges in order to perform regulatory arbitrage and creating digital assets if the regulations weren't there, and it would have complete destruction on the stock market. So therefore, they can't have one rule for one type of asset and another rule, because then even people would start creating DAOs and funds and all sorts of things just to buy out all the companies on the stock markets, as more and more happens on these types of instruments. So it will be moving those into securities and adjusting certain things as well. The next thing that I think we'll forecast is treating Bitcoin as a commodity, and maybe ETH as a commodity, as they have indicated in the past. And therefore, the CFTC, the Commodities Futures Trading Commission, can take jurisdiction and ensure that sufficient anti-money laundering and tax collection processes are implemented, not into Bitcoin itself, but the financial institutions that are engaging with Bitcoin. And there is one more possible outcome, which is that they decide to put together new type of banking style regulations to treat these different stable coins, virtual assets, and commodities that they're now treating as properties, securities, and currencies. And they decide to create some kind of new asset class out of it and implement what the world is now calling virtual assets, and have a new regime called Virtual Asset Service Provider, VASPs, in the US, so that they can build custom-built regulations in order to encourage this. Now, whether they shoehorn all of this into their existing commodities laws, securities laws, and currencies laws and push it towards a central bank digital currency, or they set up custom-built regulations in order to get the happy medium through virtual asset service providers, will determine whether US is a player in the future as this industry becomes significantly more important. And my belief is, because they have now figured out that 40 million Americans, representing 16% of their population, has already purchased the cryptocurrencies, and because they've allowed ETFs to launch, and now millions and trillions and billions is going to be in people's pensions, we can just stop talking about this US ban that stops people investing in Bitcoin in the first place, because it is now completely integrated into the people's financial futures. And therefore, if you still are using the whole threat of US ban as a reason not to build and protect your wealth, then please do move on. Please check out some of the videos that I've been releasing over the years to understand what value this brings to countries and individuals and companies as well. So I've written a bunch of notes, and so that's really just to save you all the bother. I can tell you this is going to go on for a long time, but I'm pretty certain those will be the outcomes. We'll either have the VASPs, or they'll be putting those different assets into the different regimes, and we can all move on and get on with growing the industry and the sector as it is. And so now let's go beyond this. Why is this US executive order being implemented right now in the middle of the potential of a NATO and Russia conflict? Well, I'd like to give 3 predictions if you haven't been watching previous videos that I've released on my YouTube channel to help you understand. And then I'm going to just go through some of the likely reactions as a result of the outcome of this executive order from different countries. And then I can give some more speculative, wacky forecasts on what I think comes next, as well as the predictions that I think I'm preparing myself for. Firstly, if you haven't watched the 4-part video series, it's available on retirementplanb.com/book, which was released 2 years ago, sharing how I build and protect my wealth, ready for inflation, deflation, economic growth, economic decline, sanctions, censorship, financial failures, wars, so that I'm prepared for all outcomes, and the content is relevant today. As I said, if your basic freedoms are being taken away right now, then unfortunately it may be too late for you to start focusing on the finance. But for those of you that are in the middle of financial mass destruction, and for those of you that think it may be coming to you, best to start preparing, because when it happens, it can tend to be a little bit too late. So let's get into some predictions now with the US, assuming the US has clarity and that it is embracing the Bitcoin and cryptocurrency industry because it doesn't want to be left behind. And if it wanted to ban, it would have happened. It would have happened in the days of the Silk Road, when it was really something that they may have been able to take down, but now they've decided to embrace. So predictions. Firstly, sanctions are being implemented upon Russia right now, and their gold reserves were the asset at their central bank. Those gold reserves, the fact that they are oil producing and that oil cannot be sold or is being more and more increasingly hard to be sold offshore, is causing ginormous increases from negative during the pandemic to record highs in oil. Therefore, the price is going to most likely benefit Russia in the long term, even though it could be offset from some of those sanction effects. It's going to screw a lot of people in terms of their energy costs, and their general cost of living, and inflation is going to be a crippling effect from many, many people. And I'm sorry if you get caught on the wrong side of that as a result of these financial weapons of mass destruction that tend to punish the innocent for the acts of a few dictators and egotistical leaders that are destroying people's freedoms and financial freedoms as well. At the same time, gold is being sanctioned from Russia, which means that the $130 billion of gold that Russia has been accumulating as fast as it could possibly accumulate only really has a few places that it can go if they need to ride out the ginormous recessive effects that can happen in moving from a exporter to a more domestic economy, more like a Northern Korean style economy, or a pre-globalization China style economy where they have to rely upon their own commodities and their own economies to build. And if they need to sell their gold as a result, there really is one buyer, and that buyer is China. The PBOC wants to accumulate as much gold as it possibly can for reasons that I will go through in that. And they will do that because China needs to get a seat at what I was forecasting in that video series, Bretton Woods 3. I'll go through why I call it Bretton Woods 3 shortly, but Bretton Woods 3 is what I called in the 4-part video series, the monetary renegotiation that's going to happen in the forecasted Great Depression of the 2020s. And the US executive order is about getting its shit in gear for central bank digital currencies, for stable coins, for what's a security, for what's a currency, as they enter the negotiation table for the post-war Bretton Woods III negotiation and monetary renegotiation. Prediction one is that China will end up buying the gold, or PBOC will end up buying gold in order to get a seat at the table of Bretton Woods III. Why? Because remember what I said, the gold to GDP ratio of a country is what determines whether you're going to be statistically significant enough to have a seat at either the hidden Bretton Woods III or the public Bretton Woods III, wherever it actually goes. And there probably will be two, and you'll only hear about the second. So that's prediction number one. And China has been accumulating more and more gold than I believe is publicly disclosed. And so they have that seat at the table. And taking some of Russia's gold would be a very politically challenging environment, but also a way to get a seat at Bretton Woods III, as they do. Prediction number two, the Bitcoin policy of those that don't have a seat at the table, i.e. we're talking about the El Salvadors, the Central American nations, the South American nations, various jurisdictions in Asia, and various other jurisdictions across Europe, outside of the EU maybe. Their policy on Bitcoin and how they react to this, and whether they accumulate and whether they adjust to a Bitcoin standard, and I don't mean a involuntary Bitcoin standard, I mean a voluntary Bitcoin standard, which is using Bitcoin as a politically neutral global digital hard sound money, will determine whether they can potentially get a seat at the table in the upcoming monetary renegotiation. And if they can't get a seat at the table, whether they can get on the right side of financial history based upon whether they're implementing a Bitcoin standard within their country. So those that have a seat at the table will be the countries that have the largest gold to GDP ratio. Those that don't will be their Bitcoin policy that determines whether they can compete in the future. Prediction number three is talking about China to buy Bitcoin Russia gold reserves and reverse their Bitcoin ban. This is one of the worst moves. They haven't banned Bitcoin, but they banned the mining of Bitcoin, and they banned the exchange of Bitcoin within their country. That meant that all the mining industry was great for Bitcoin because it got diversified all around the world, but it also gave a ginormous chess piece to the US economy when a ginormous Bitcoin mining industry emerged within Texas. And various other jurisdictions. So US has given itself a point there, and China has lost a point there based upon looking to implement their central bank digital currency. But I don't think it's too late to reverse that decision. And in fact, they've already released consultation papers looking for opinions on whether and how they should reverse that decision. Okay, so those are the three predictions. Now let's follow the money. If you've been watching previous broadcasts, and if you haven't, head over to my YouTube channel. If you're watching this somewhere else, Simon Dixon on YouTube, hit the subscribe button, hit the bell symbol, hit all, and YouTube will notify you as I give real-time updates around these emergency broadcasts. I tend to give a little update after going to the gym around whatever's going on at the time and in my mind. And you can stay ahead of these things rather than just waiting for the big events and the big emergency broadcasts. Okay, so follow the money. Right, I said gold to GDP ratio is important. Bitcoin policy is important. Let's look at the biggest gold to GDP ratio countries that I was talking about in the 4-part video series a couple of years back. The first was Russia, who had the highest. China, who has the highest. one of the highest, but I believe that it's a lot higher than is reported and could be more than Russia. USA, obviously, people have their own theories around auditing the Fed and whether the gold actually exists. But I believe, let's assume that the US has that significant there, and Germany representing Europe. Essentially, you could call Europe Big Germany, and those are the countries that have a seat at the table in terms of what the monetary renegotiation will look like. So let's follow the money around these different countries and figure out what moves they have made so that we can start to look into the tea leaves and make more of the wacky forecasts so that we can position ourselves financially based upon different types of events. So let's look at Russia. So Russia was accumulating as much gold as it could possibly accumulated prior to this invasion war, whatever you want to call it. And they were the first mover in a war. So they are being, Putin is being depicted as Hitler. He's responsible. He has many people's blood on their hand. But let's not remember that there are two sides to the story. War is bad no matter what. We can't trust the narrative. You got to follow the money. There is oil involved. There is interest on both sides. There is NATO involved, and all of the dictators involved in these foreign policies in the US that have built a military empire, and the dictators that are punishing their population by invading other current countries, and the dictators that are launching financial weapons of mass destruction. Shame on you, you all have blood on your hands, and karma is a bitch. But let's look at those. So I think that after this, the only thing that I can see that happening is that Russia becomes an insulated economy, much like North Korea. Years and years and years of insulation, and then some political negotiation from different leaders in the future. Sorry if you live in Russia, your best bet is to get the frick out. There's not good times ahead for the innocent people that don't agree with what's happening, and that they, build a better financial future or stay in your country if you choose to rebuild and have influence there. But it's not going to be pretty. How's China going to react to this? So remember, China owns $4.5 trillion of US treasuries. It's one of its biggest risks is that during the pandemic, the US could have decided to, because when Trump was in charge and love-hate relationship with China that he was looking to reverse, those $4.5 trillion, they could have said that the pandemic was injected into the economy on purpose, and therefore we're going to delete those $4.5 trillion in exchange for the crimes that they may be claiming or whatever narrative that wants to be painted there. But for China, they've been accumulating a lot of gold along the way. And they have also been competing with the International Monetary Fund. Now, the International Monetary Fund and its economic hitmen have been, implementing tied loans for years and decades now that have destroyed countries' futures. And so the International Monetary Fund is not a popular place to be right now. Ironically, at the same time, US is looking for where they're going to get their oil from. So all of a sudden, Venezuela becomes important after sending their economic hitmen in, and the Bank of England might decide to give some of the gold that they stole from Venezuela that was stored at the Bank of England, not your keys, not your coins, the lessons there, that was stored at the Bank of England. And they may need to reverse some of these policies because all of a sudden oil is important, and they need those new alloys that the IMF has been ruining their relationships with by implementing debt-based infrastructure funding that is unaffordable for those countries, getting them addicted to dollars and then tying them to spending that money in America through tied loans on either defense spending or infrastructure spending. That means that America is pumping all of this debt money into that they create, and then leaving the US dollar loans there. And then the money, the dollars actually end up back in America, and the debt prevails, crippling those countries, and then them being depicted as developing countries or third world countries or countries that have more people that are bombing each other that we shouldn't give media attention to right now, simply because they don't have enough power in the oil side, or whatever the financial weapons of mass destruction may lead to. So they will launch their domestic central bank digital currency, already launched. So they've already got a head start there. China has already been competing with the International Monetary Fund for infrastructure funding without tied loans, making them less predatory. So they have been empire building and building allies, and the world is dependent upon them for their exports as well at the same time. And so whether that $4.3 trillion gets deleted as a result of economic sanctions when China may purchase some of Russia's gold, is going to be one of those considerations. And they're also, as I said, they made a really bad move, which is banning Bitcoin exchanges and Bitcoin mining, which means that rather having some say in the industry, they gave it all, and they gave the point and the chess piece to other countries. Great for Bitcoin, distributed it further, but I think there'll be a reversal of that policy as well. What is US going to be doing? Well, the US is going to be preparing itself for the negotiations of US dollar to still be significant at Bretton Woods. That is the underlying of this executive order, is to ensure that they're crystal clear. They are painted as somebody that is supporting the Bitcoin and cryptocurrency industry and has crystal clear regulations so that they can ensure that the data stays within the US when people are exchanging money they can own for fiat money, because they are plonkers and they see Bitcoin as a way of accumulating more fiat. And by being a fiat thinker, they're exchanging currency that's designed to go up in value for a currency that's designed to go down in value. And then they trade it and pay a bunch of taxes and create all sorts of problems for themselves, rather than being a Bitcoin thinker and seeing corrections in prices as fiat being a mechanism to accumulate more Bitcoin and be potentially on the right side of financial history as digital hard sale money becomes more statistically significant in geopolitics, and currency wars and all sorts of things that are coming in right now. And so the IMF is going to be launching their, central bank digital currency. Refer back to Emergency Broadcast 1. If you haven't watched that one, head over to retirementplanb.com/book. It's all in the membership portal, completely free, with the book, with the 4-part video series, with a ginormous masterclass for those that really want to take this seriously, as well as the previous emergency broadcast as well. Really, this is, I think that Bretton Woods 3 is going to look like a fiat and commodity-backed central bank digital currency, and therefore it's not likely to go through because US will manage to try and negotiate a significant part of US's future into the standard. So if you look at US history, just in case, just to give you decades of history in a few sentences, essentially, the US negotiated after the last World War. John Maynard Keynes, an economist from the UK, was at Bretton Woods and said we should launch a global digital currency, a global currency called the Bancor. And that was rejected, and the US said, use the US dollar, it's got more adoption, and here's what, I promise that we'll allow it to be convertible into gold. So if we get dishonest with our policies, then our gold reserves end up leaving the country. And so they negotiated that position. And then at what I call Bretton Woods 2, they also did one other thing. They launched the IMF as a predatory way in order to get US dollar loans into countries all around the world, so that everyone could become dependent upon the drug called the dollar, which is a very hard effect to reverse. They priced gold and they priced oil in it, led to petrodollars and all sorts of things. They launched the IMF. Then in 1971 was the unofficial, unelected policy around Bretton Woods 2, which is where President Nixon just said, screw you, the dollar's no longer convertible into gold, and we can just print as much of it now that the IMF and our economic hitman have got the world addicted to dollars. And we have created a military empire to replace the British military empire and the British naval fleets. And now we can put, based upon these IMF-tied loans, we can then put military forces in every country through US foreign policy and create that US empire. And so they removed that convertibility, and the world got off addicted to US treasuries and US dollars, and they're at every central bank, and it's used as the most useful currency in the world as a medium of exchange, unit of account, but a useless store of value. And people try and save dollars. They end up working harder in a currency that's designed to go down in value and gets diluted by the Federal Reserve because they've managed to find bigger and bigger markets for those treasuries and dollars. And therefore, they implemented Bretton Woods 2. So then we're making sure with this executive order that they are positioned for Bretton Woods 3 to ensure, because they have completely inflated much of the value of the dollar away, 90% less than when the Federal Reserve was originally implemented to support economic stability. A 90% correction, booms and busts and financial crisis is useless track record of Federal Reserve. Well done on screwing up all of the goals of what you originally got sent to. And so they're now positioned themselves for Bretton Woods 3 to remain significant. And I do believe that the dollar becomes the tool when China's empire dwarfs US GDP in the years ahead due to them competing with the International Monetary Fund in their international infrastructure loans without the tide loans. And so then you've got to look at Germany. Germany is essentially big Europe. Germany controls Europe through its gold to GDP ratios, so it gets a seat at the table, and the euro tries to become one of the baskets of currencies behind the big international global currency that will be backed by a basket of these currencies and backed by the central bank digital currencies as well. Just looking at some of the notes as well. And remember, UK is no longer a player. Why? Because they managed to negotiate themselves as being a part of Europe without giving up the pound. They had the best of both worlds. They had the pound, so they didn't have to bow down to the predatory nature of the European Central Bank, but they had all of the international unions and benefits from being part of Europe. And the great British people managed to negotiate themselves a Brexit where they took away all of the benefits of being in Europe, even though they had the best deal out of everybody in the entire Europe. Keep your own currency, independence from the European Central Bank, but get all the benefits of the union. Well done, Brits. So that's the UK has really made itself insignificant in terms of financial weapons of mass destruction. So what does Boris Johnson do? Well, he's got to flex his muscle and say and rally all the troops behind NATO and get ready for World War III. So UK becomes most exposed because it's trying to flex its muscle through trying to remain significant as rallying the troops together when this may move from just a Russia and Ukrainian to Russia and NATO as well. So well done, great policy there, but that's the Euro side, right? Now, I talked about those are all going to be at the table. They're going to be the only people that matters at Bretton Woods 3 because of their gold to GDP ratios as forecasted. Now, other players can still have either a seat at the table or compete with whatever is negotiated against them at Bretton Woods 3. And that is based upon their Bitcoin policies. So let's look a little bit wider than the sensationalized headlines and what you see in the media. So firstly, I talked about it a long time ago. Japan has always been the quiet force in the background, making many right moves on their Bitcoin policies. And it's the only one that's got a statistically significant GDP that has been making many of the right moves to make sure that it's significant in the Bitcoin industry. Doesn't get the headlines, but it's been the longest standing country to make sure that it's got its Bitcoin policy right. Why? Sorry to do the stereotypes, but Japan policy has always been a 100-year game, multi-generational game, and Japan still continues to play its multi-generational long game and make sure it gets its Bitcoin strategy right as well. Prior to the war in Ukraine, and we saw that both Russia and Ukraine legalized Bitcoin in order to make sure that it was the right move for Ukraine. They've now raised $60 million in cryptocurrency, which has become a lifeline in the weapons of mass destruction that are being thrown at them as the world throws financial weapons of mass destruction at Russia. And so Russia has now legalized it before the war and before the invasion, but it can't be spent internationally. So at the moment, there's lots of pressure on cryptocurrency exchanges to punish the innocent Russians that have nothing to do with this by taking away their life jacket of being able to exchange some of their currency and their financial assets, which are being destroyed right now, for some Bitcoin at an exchange as it gets more aggressive. Now, of course, if they want to implement sanctions on people that are doing illegal war crimes, then eat your heart out, go for it. And the sanction policies so far have been targeted at those, but it's destroying the wealth of the innocent as a result. And so as a result of this, this movement towards Russia being more of a domestic, as a result of these financial weapons of mass destruction, I don't think Russia's going to get a seat at the table, and they're going to lose their seat at the table. And if they end up having to sell their gold to China, then that gives China, the bigger upper hand in their empire building as the most significant, largest economy and most likely contender in this Game of Thrones of currency wars that comes ahead as a result of moving into a monetary renegotiation and Bretton Woods 3. So as I said, I think China will reverse the ban to make sure that they become a player in the Bitcoin industry. Why would you not? Because there's no benefit from giving everything to all the other countries on that as well, which would be good for Bitcoin as well. What else have I got in the notes? If you haven't been following the politics in South Korea, sorry if I'm saying this wrong, Yoon Suk Yeol, I probably crucified it, is the new president. And the major issue that was really debated around the future of the president in South Korea was their policy on cryptocurrency. So South Korea now recognizes that 5 million people of their population, i.e. 10% of their population, has accounts with cryptocurrency exchange, and they've been using it as a life jacket in many of their suppressed policies that have prevented them from being able to invest in international products. And now a president comes along and says, let's change that. Let's include South Korea. It became a really, really significant player in the 2017 boom market in cryptocurrency. And they're looking at politics and policies, and presidents are now being decided based upon their cryptocurrency policies. India's finance minister has now come out and said that they're ready to put their central bank digital currency forward, and they've recognized that the younger people, very, very significant country in the world in terms of individual ownership of gold as well as gold production. But for years and years and years, it's been ingrained into the elder generation that gold is the way you protect your wealth. They don't trust banks at all. When they implemented monetization that led to India having to queue up at their bank and take their bags of cash and risk getting shot and mugged of all their life savings in order to digitize that currency and move on to the world's largest regulated debt-based Ponzi scheme through banking, it was met with mass resistance because they do love their gold. And so what's happening right now is that the younger generation are thinking of gold as this old person's asset class. They got it in their dowries and they've accumulated all this gold. And when those generations pass away, it goes back to the younger people, and the younger people convert their gold into Bitcoin, producing one of the next future waves of Bitcoin demand as a result of converting and the intergenerational shift there. And so India, is one of those countries where you implement draconian policies and you end up with everyone on the streets rioting and not putting up with any of the confiscation or, using financial weapons and mass destruction on their savings. And then that brings us to the smartest move that the US has made, is clarifying and getting its shit in gear so that it can make sure that it gets on the wave of one of the largest wealth redistributions that I think is coming as a result of the legacy financial system and legacy countries and legacy companies deciding what their policy is around this new disruptive asset class and Bitcoin as digital hard sound money. And so you get the clarification on what's a security, what's a currency, and what is a commodity. And let's not forget my trip back from El Salvador. You have these three models now. We've seen what happens when you outright ban Bitcoin. You end up losing a big tool or chess piece like China has experienced. And we've seen what happens when El Salvador goes all in, makes Bitcoin legal tender, and builds its policies based upon Bitcoin and redefines and just says, let's get the central banks out. The central bank in our country, it can be a regulator. Let's say no to the IMF. Let's say no to the Bank of England. Let's say no to the Federal Reserve, and let's construct financial products based upon Bitcoin. And so El Salvador shows what happens when you go all in and they get double digit every month-on-month growth in a country that was experiencing very, very hard financial hardship and lots of mass poverty. And you get to see what happens when you sit a bit more neutral in the US side. And so they're getting their shit in gear and deciding, well, obviously we can't do what El Salvador's doing because we have the most important and most adopted medium of exchange and unit of account called the dollar in the world. And saying that we make Bitcoin legal tender would be financial suicide for our dollar. So we'll leave that to those countries, but we'll make sure that we are on the right side of financial history and we'll get our ducks in a row, as opposed to all of these 3-letter and 4-letter organizations fighting over, who gets jurisdiction. Okay, so the end result of this all and this emergency broadcast, I hope you're enjoying it. If you're enjoying this, do me a favor, hit the like button, share this for people that want to watch the recording, and make sure that you catch up on everything at retirementplanb.com/book, where I've just condensed it down to the most important free content. And I'm also, to let you know, we'll be releasing my new book this year. I'm already a few chapters in, to make sure that we can give you all the tools you need as well. So where does this actually go? Let's look at the end result. Well, the end result of this is that you have basically central bank digital currencies launched in every single country, global central bank digital currencies, and it used to become a freedom detracting unit of account, medium of exchange, where it will be integrated into a fiscal and monetary union. Sorry for the jargon. A monetary union means the policies in which you change your money supply and use interest rates as a tool, essentially, to stimulate and create booms and busts and send people in debt bankrupt, or encourage people to take on more debt through interest rates in a regulated Ponzi scheme. That will come and have a systemic risk event that needs deleveraging. A central bank digital currency is not a debt-based Ponzi scheme. It is a freedom detracting movement away from free markets to socialist markets to communism, based upon using a unit of account and a median of exchange, and combining government policies, i.e. fiscal policies, with monetary policies, i.e. monetary policies, in a fiscal and monetary union, popularized in a term called modern monetary theory. And that will be competing with a voluntary Bitcoin standard. And Bitcoin standard is a wealth generational tool, as it has been for the last 13 years, producing 69 million% returns from its bottom to its peak. Not saying that's going to happen again, not financial advice, do your own research. Those that save Bitcoin has become a wealth creation tool, store of value, and those that already have wealth will continue to use gold as a preserver of wealth in geopolitics and political uncertainty. Remember to go through the 4-part video series if you want to know the ratios at which and how I use the different financial products, when I started investing my savings live in the video series called The Great Depression of the 2020s. And so you move into a central bank digital currency fiat payment mechanism, deleveraging the banks, which are systemically risky and have all of this debt in the world's largest regulated Ponzi scheme. And rather than bailing in or bailing out everybody that would have lost money at the bank when they go systemically risky as a result of all these sanctions and geopolitical currency wars and warfare, gets to swap their savings for their central bank digital currency. Then you have the politically neutral players in the commodities market, whether it be Bitcoin and gold. And whether you were shafted by the system and you didn't get any wealth, then Bitcoin becomes a mechanism, a speculative mechanism, store of value. And those that have a lot of wealth already will look to increase it using Bitcoin and hold gold during these geopolitical warfares. All crypto innovation, in the end, writing's on the wall, it becomes regulated, and we have this centralized and decentralized marketplace. And by decentralized, I mean semi-decentralized, as if the US decides to implement its virtual asset service provider, banking-like regulations, then you have financial innovation built on top of central bank digital currencies, and financial innovation built upon Bitcoin as well, where you enter into these more decentralized and semi-decentralized financial products. But it all becomes integrated with the policies. If you think that technological innovation means that governments aren't going to care about what they used to care about, investor protections, and now they care more about anti-money laundering, sanctions, and tax collection. If you think that they're going to give up on those agendas in the name of financial innovation, then think again, because the regulations are going to make sure that all of the tools and technical tools are integrated into those central bank digital currencies. And then you get these DeFi products that remove, they can do it compliantly, but make it where you have individual control, and then you have the centralized control that you will see on top of these central bank digital currencies. So central bank digital currency led government control in order to give you a unit of account, a median of exchange, and then you have the movement into that fiscal and monetary union. So that's what I think is going to happen. That's what I've been preaching for a long time, and I just added a bit more color in order to give you some tools. Now let's get a little bit more speculative, and then I'm going to end it there in the final section. So these things, I'm not sure if they are going to happen, but let's have a little bit of fun as this got a little bit serious as well. what are the speculative things? So the speculative thing is that China ends up buying Russian gold. It could be political suicide in the geo world, or it could be a very smart move in a Bretton Woods 3 negotiation. But if they do, then I believe that the Russia and Ukrainian war will spill over into NATO, and it will become too important if China makes that move. And then you have a NATO, and that will be World War III. I'm sorry, but that's what they've been warning us against. And whether it happens or not, get yourself prepared financially for whatever comes next. And that's been my lifetime work. How do you do that? Subscribe to this channel, hit the bell symbol, hit all. YouTube will notify you as I keep you up to date. And go to retirementplanb.com/book. Get your copy of the book I published 10 years ago, the first published book in the world to include Bitcoin, and watch the 4-part video series, The Emergency Broadcasts. And on YouTube, I'll continue to give you more ongoing things as this evolves. I think in 2024, Trump becomes another player. I think that Trump already has the relationship with both Russia and has already declared war on China. China becomes more significant. The world demands someone that can deal with Putin. I think Trump has positioned himself for that 2024 election as well. That antagonizes China. And Trump and Xi Jinping, the president of China, start to compete in order to be the peacekeeper in the negotiation with Putin and whatever comes back from this Russia. I told you this would be speculative. I think this is some of the things that we can read in the financial markets that lead to forecasts in the political market. Trump makes China the enemy because Trump understands that China is the next empire, and because Trump wants to do his job, which is defend the US empire and defend the dollar, will continue to make racial tension as he did during his loss between China and US, has some kind of way of maintaining some kind of peace with Russia and whatever comes next from that. We get inflation. Inflation will continue to grow. That is the only result of all this. You can't use central banks to print money on a debt-based fiat Ponzi scheme in order to fund all of these wars, fund all these pandemics, without getting the inflationary effect that we're experiencing. And it also comes from asset prices, and it also comes from the commodity market forces that we are experiencing right now as a result of sanctions destroying people's wealth. You can't just censor financial transactions without it impacting yourself. And these reactionary short-term dictators that are spreading these weapons of mass destruction and financial weapons of mass destruction as a result of these egoic humanitarian wars and crime. The IMF, of course, comes along as the caller of Bretton Woods 3, because the IMF is simply an extension of economic hitmen from the US. And global IMF central bank digital currencies are most likely dropped because the egos can't bang their heads together. And so everybody scrambles to implement their own central bank digital currencies, and we don't get the global currency that the conspiracy theorists have been waiting for, because I don't think the egos can coordinate on that type of scale. This is simply geopolitics and currency wars playing itself out. Where else have we got here? The central bank digital currencies, remember what they are. They're not a war on Bitcoin. They're a war on banks. They're a war on the debt-based Ponzi scheme, which is money created at a bank. When money is created at a bank, every time they issue a loan, you have a Ponzi scheme called more debt than money. In order to deleverage that, you have to find a new money supply. The new money supply, because the systemic risk event means the banks go bust if they continue, or they sell it to your pension, and that leads to the destruction of your pension as well, then the central bank digital currencies have to come in with debt-free money, which means that you have that fiscal and monetary union more control, artificial intelligence-led central bank digital currencies embedded with negative interest rates so they don't have to do it by indirectly controlling interest rates, automated tax collection as you transact, automated sanctions for the central bank digital currencies between each other, blacklisting, blockading, anti-money laundering laws automated through technology, know your customer rules embedded with your passport, embedded into your currency in this fiscal and monetary union, and technology-empowered removal of freedoms and controls, and a shift from free markets over to more socialist-led markets as a result of people demanding it through wealth inequality, because those that got on the wrong side of the world's largest regulated Ponzi scheme have no choice but demand their government to help them in a time when the system shafted them in these financial weapons of mass destruction. And I do believe that the end win of that will be FedCoin. I do believe that the dollar is too ingrained into all financial products, ingrained into all central banks. And I do think that this is why US needs to get its shit together, publish the future of money, and recognize that FedCoin is the inevitable future of the payment rails because of the position of the dollar at the moment. In the global central bank digital currency wars. I don't think that China can get a foothold in that one, but it does become a much, much more statistically significant economy as the creator of the next empire through its competing with the International Monetary Fund and not implementing as many predatory loans through financial weapons of mass destruction and more allies as it exports its goods as well in the next moves. So then what happens is I believe that we move from the British and American military crisis. The British was the most violent form of empire that was built based upon the pound being backed by the military fleet. That was then replaced with US foreign policy, where it used the dollar in order to set up bases around the world to implement its US military crisis, which leads to much of these conflicts because people are fearful of these guns and these weapons that are being built outside of their countries. And it moves over to China, which will be the environmental crisis as the next thing. And really, you end up with that kind of shift that I think we're starting to see. What else have I got in my notes? I think Trump is then blamed, I think, because they need a fool person for the fall of the empire. Easy victim, easy person to blame it on because of reckless policies, raging war on China. And then they can say that the Trump was the reason, and all the Democrats can then say, see, I told you. And then we end up with blaming the Ponzi scheme on the fact that this is systemic. Whoever the leader is, this would have happened anyway because it is the world's largest regulated Ponzi scheme. But we get this left-right war, and people start to say, see, I told you, you needed to do this. And we continue with the egoic tribalism that we've experienced during that. But the US remains powerful because of FedCoin, and China remains powerful because of its empire building. And then we need to figure out how to live in some kind of harmony. But if you get in geopolitics, then Bitcoin and Bitcoin's policy gives every individual, every company, and every country the ability to get out of all the geopolitics, get out of the world's largest regulated debt-based Ponzi schemes, and give themselves more sovereignty and be able to have sovereign individuals, sovereign companies, and sovereign countries that are building financial products based upon the fact that digital, hard, sound money now exists, is politically neutral, and it's a tool that any individual, any company, and any country can use in these. And that's why this executive order is important. That's why Ukraine and Russia made sure that they legalized Bitcoin before they started into their war. And it's why countries like El Salvador are deciding no to the IMF, no to the Bank of England, no to the Fed, no to predatory loans, and saying we can do it by getting rid of central banks and building financial products based upon Bitcoin. And so I believe that the next crisis, the final crisis, and the goal of my lifetime work, and the reason that I'll be publishing new books, the reason that I published books in the past, the reason that I've given all those videos away for free is because the next crisis is a wealth inequality crisis. And this wealth inequality crisis is based upon people understanding how to position themselves neutral from these geopolitics, get ready for inflation, get ready for deflation, get ready for economic growth, get ready for economic decline, get ready for censorship in financial services and financial crisis. And so I would like you, as a favor, if you enjoyed this content and you think that it's important for anyone else to understand the nature of the games and how to build and protect their own wealths, I do believe that there will be a wealth crisis. And my goal is to make sure that you're on the right side of that wealth crisis, because the unwinding of the, the crazy leverage and the world's largest regulated Ponzi scheme will be shaping and dictating whether you're on the right side of digital hard sound money. Could be wrong, could be right. My phone's ringing and I'm going to have to switch that one off. So that's a great time to end. Always remember, you are alive at one of the most interesting and exciting times in financial history. I have my genuine thoughts are with you if you are on the wrong side of weapons of mass destruction, and if you are on the wrong side of financial weapons of mass destruction. My thoughts are with anybody, and that I hope that we can figure out a way of doing this with peace, love, and unity. And my way of doing this with peace, love, and unity is by doing what I know how to do best, which is educating more people on the financial things so that you can be more prepared. My hope is that you get yourself on the right side of financial change, because a lot of people are going to need your support when they get on the wrong side of financial inequality and the unwinding of the debt-based Ponzi scheme. And my hope is that you build enough wealth and you protect enough of your wealth to be a force for good for other people. And if you enjoyed this in any way, shape, or form, then please do like, please do share, please do subscribe to this channel, and I'll make sure that you are armed with the information to try and stay on the right side of financial change.